Hello humans, welcome to The Great Everything, a recipe for living based on art, donuts and transformation. I'm Patrick, a former banking lawyer who saw the light and quit to dedicate my life to culture and philosophy. Today I want to talk a little about cultural appropriation. Well, what's that got to do with anything? I'm so glad you asked, dear anonymous listener who sounds almost exactly like me. Allow me to explain. The third limb in my recipe for a better life is transformation. Change, the active pursuit of self-betterment, wanting to become a better human. Some say it's the meaning of life itself, what we were put here to do, to constantly improve, to become better than we were just yesterday. But why would we want to do that? Ultimately, it must have something to do with the impact that we're having on the world and the people around us, of course. Because none of us is an island, we've all heard that cliche. Everything we do is output. Every action, every word, every bit of body language, every thought even. It's all something that we're putting out, we're contributing to the space around us. And that is a huge responsibility, that everything you do has real consequences. So of course you have to be careful. You have to think things through. Outside of ourselves, it's chaos. It's just chaos out there. All complex structures, from buildings to bridges to societies, to ideas even, like peace and democracy, they're all based on very fragile equilibria. It's all very delicate. And our world, at a particle level, is descending into entropy. All structures, they're being worn down as we speak. By a physical law of the universe, every second, it's a little more worn down. So we all have a choice. When we put some of us out there into the common space, what are we going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to give entropy a hand and increase the chaos? Are you just going to contribute to the senseless noise? Or are you going to be instead a voice of reason, of order, of peace? Somebody whose actions and words help forge structures and friendships and communities? Are you going to build or are you going to destroy? And to me, the idea of cultural appropriation is inherently destructive. It doesn't build, it doesn't unite, it divides. For those of you who don't know, cultural appropriation is a sociological concept. It deals with the adoption of elements of a minority culture by members of the dominant culture. The proponents of the idea, they tend to condemn such adoptions, like white people wearing dreadlocks or wearing indigenous garb, or in one very notable example, posting pictures of their Vietnamese pho soup as a violation of intellectual property rights of the minority culture. But just note one thing, whether or not you agree with this idea, you have to admit that it is inherently divisive. It has to be. It wouldn't make sense without division. The whole idea is based on the notion of there being a minority culture and a dominant culture, us and them. And which individuals get to do something, like wear dreadlocks, serve sushi, depends entirely upon what group they belong to. So what matters is the group, not the individual. So that's the starting point for this idea. Now, last week there was a bit of a debate surrounding this. Keziah Daum, a young girl from Salt Lake, Utah, decided to wear a Chinese dress, a cheongsam, to prom. She'd found the dress in a vintage store. She liked the look, she wore it, she posted the pics on Twitter. I saw them, she looked lovely. Except not everyone liked it. Young Jeremy Lan was outraged. So he tweeted, "My culture is not your goddamn prom dress." And that tweet got over 100,000 retweets. 100,000 people actually agree and were offended by a prom dress. The Twitter storm grew, with whole conversations and debates and threads about whether the girl had gone too far, was this racist, or was it just inadvertently racist but still racist? There were some saying that this was a deeply important traditional dress, while many pointed out that the cheongsam is actually a modern, westernized style that holds no deep cultural significance. And meanwhile, in China, people got wind of the controversy, and they were just baffled at why anyone would be offended by this. They seemed pleased that someone appreciated an item of their clothing. So that's what happened. But what I think is interesting is this. In this debate, I see a lot of chaos over order, a lot of giving in to some tribal gut instinct, anger, instead of stopping to reflect on what was actually going on. It seems obvious, uncontroversial, that we should all be striving for a world where people from different cultures can enrich society by contributing and sharing forms of art and music and food from all the diverse backgrounds we're fortunate to have. We should all want that, right? Except I see objections. And the kinds of objections I saw to, well, in this case, the cheongsam dress worn for prom by a white girl, go a little like this. If a white person does this, i.e. someone who is seen as being higher up in the social hierarchy, then it is inherently offensive because it is a form of taking from another culture. Except, of course, it's impossible to take from another culture. A culture is not a living being. It doesn't have property. It doesn't have a bank account or a picket fence or a car. It doesn't have feelings or a home. It doesn't have anything that can be taken. Because if it did, we should be able to determine what was taken, how that culture was diminished by that taking, by that appropriation. We would be able to quantify the loss suffered, and we would be able to sue for compensation under existing property laws. Similarly to like when your neighbor takes something from your garden or your home or your car, you can take them to court for that. Because you can point at what's been taken and how that thing being taken has actually damaged you because now you have less of it. Except we can't do that with culture. Because a culture does not own a food or a hairstyle or a garb. It contributes it. If you're the kind of person who thinks that a culture owns something, interrogate yourself on where this feeling is coming from. Why do you feel so jealous of it to the point where you wouldn't want other people to appreciate it and enjoy it? What is the true nature of what you're feeling? I'd add a side point here. The objection that if the thing is done by a white person, it's inherently offensive. Well, this enables racism because, first of all, it says that there is a racial hierarchy where certain people, whites, are superior to others. They're stronger than others. It is actually a supremacist way of thinking. And also, this objection selectively ignores appropriation from cultures that aren't politically important enough to deserve protection. Where's my Twitter storm every time someone eats chicken parmesan and overcooks pasta? Another objection I see is it is cultural appropriation unless the white person was invited to partake in the culture. But think about how weird this objection is. Who exactly is it that gets to invite the white person to participate? I mean, is it one specific person from that ethnicity? Or is it 2 people? Or is it 100? Is it a question of numbers? Or should we be electing a cultural ambassador for every culture, and that person, what they say goes? They have carte blanche. They can invite or uninvite anyone they please because they're the cultural invitation ambassador. One objection that I read on the prom dress front is that there were a number of Asians complaining, and that indicated that the girl, Keziah, wasn't invited. Yet, at the same time, should we then ignore the fact that in China, people were saying, what's the big deal with this? We're happy she wore the dress and that she likes it. Or is it that every complaint is like a veto? So even if almost everyone is happy and not offended and pleased for the person to participate in the culture by wearing the dress, then the one person who is offended, their vote counts the most. It's a veto. So basically an invitation has to be unanimous. Seems like a pretty unattainable standard. Another objection is it's offensive because when I was a kid, people made fun of me for wearing the clothes or eating the foods of my culture. That feeling I truly understand, and that is the honest core of what's going on here. But at the same time, why was that the responsibility of the individual person wearing the garment now? Unless Keziah or anyone else was directly involved in making fun of you that time, which obviously would make them a hypocrite because now they're deciding to appreciate the culture, which is what they were making fun of you for a while back. Unless they were the ones making fun of you, why should this determine what they decide to wear? Why is this any of their business? It seems to me, and this is where I feel you might be contributing to chaos, it seems to me you are taking your negative feelings, which are understandable, and you're finding a target for them. But there's no causal link between your feelings and the person you've decided to target. So when you're looking at Keziah or someone else you find guilty of cultural appropriation who didn't mean any harm by it, you're not seeing them as a human being, as an individual. You're literally seeing white person and associating them with the people who made you feel humiliated that time simply because they happen to share the same skin color. I understand the emotions you're feeling, but what you're doing with those feelings is called racism. Another objection that I'm seeing, and I'll make this one the last one, is that it's just white people telling us not to be offended. They should just shut up and listen. Well, first of all, no, it's not. In this case, it's Asians too, maybe even the majority, that are saying, this is fine, this is not offensive. But the fact is, even if it were just white people, if they just have to shut up and listen, if they aren't allowed to be a part of the conversation, unless they agree with you, of course, then you're not allowed to tell them what to do. You can't decide what I get to do or not. There has to be a conversation there, and I have to be a part of that conversation. Behaviors shouldn't be imposed by one group upon another. They should be agreed through dialogue. In conclusion, you do have every right to be offended by whatever you want, no matter what the intent behind the act you were offended by. You have the right to be offended by stuff that wasn't meant offensively. But what I think you should consider is this. I don't know if you've ever heard of the cat-grass syndrome. It's the one where people have become convinced that their family members have been replaced by identical imposters. The fact that you're feeling something, whether it's anger or sadness or offense, doesn't necessarily mean that your feelings are tracking reality. It's your right to feel those things, but you shouldn't be able to tell other people how to behave on the basis of those feelings. The basis for requesting certain behaviors from other people has to be rational, so it can be agreed upon, not just imposed by whomever happens to feel angriest or the most offended. The reason this matters is quite simple. If you're telling me to change a behavior, or even the way I live, based on a feeling, I need to understand the rules, because I can't come in and check with you and check how you're feeling before I decide to do something or not. I get that you're feeling some way, and I don't want you to feel that way, because why would I? I'm not a dick. I don't want you to feel offended. But at the same time, I can't just take the fact that you're offended as the reason for me to do or not do something, because what if you're the kind of person who just gets offended by anything? And there are people like that. So there have to be rules that are logical. There have to be rules, but I can't go out and do a Twitter poll every time I decide to do or not do something because someone might be offended. That's why we need to have logic and rules. But getting back to the actual point of cultural appropriation, look, I have a lot of sympathy for people who have been mistreated for their culture. My whole life, I've never lived at home. I was always a foreigner. I'm a foreigner in the UK, I'm a foreigner in Italy, I'm a foreigner in Hungary, and for all my teenage years I was the only Jew in my school. I spent 8 years in Sicily, never meeting a single other Jewish person who wasn't my mother. So I can understand the feelings of anger one could feel if they were made fun of or bullied because of their hairstyle, and now, 10 years later, everyone's wearing that hairstyle and suddenly it's trendy because some white supermodel wore it. Hey man, I suffered for that hair. Except no, you didn't. Your hair never had anything to do with it. It could have been anything else. You could have had any other hairstyle. They would have picked on you for your clothes or your shoes or your voice or your face. You didn't suffer because of your culture. You suffered because some people are assholes. So, don't be an asshole. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Great Everything, and if you like the show, there's a few ways you can help out. You can leave a review on iTunes or anywhere else you listen to this podcast, or you can share it, embed it, talk about it on your podcast or write a blog about it, or you could just add me on the various Twitters and Instagrams out there. But if you want to be a part of the conversation, you can call in using Anchor, or you can look up The Great Everything on Facebook. I have a discussion group there where people talk about literally everything, from ethics to politics to Marvel movies. So if that's your thing, check it out. I hope I see you again here, there, or anywhere else, frankly. Until then, grazie e arrivederci.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.